Ready? Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Welcome to Lyceum. I am the new Lyceum director, Reverend Gregory Kent, and I'm very happy to be here and be part of this. And I'm very happy to see all of you here today also. So thank you for being here. I also want to say thank you to the Reverend Dr. Don Zangi, my predecessor, for all the years of service he put into Lyceum. So thank you, Don. So you're going to see a little bit of a different format with me. And I'm going to ask you to have a little patience. What I'd like to do is monthly themes. This way we can take a month to talk about certain subjects. It'll give you time to prepare questions if you have questions. And it also gives us time to talk about it and learn about it instead of jumping around so much. So we're going to try that. I'm going to be your teacher for the month of July. Then starting in August, we'll bring in other teachers from the camp to talk about subjects. So, I am a teacher by trade, and teachers enjoy when those participating interact. So please feel free to ask questions at any time. Physically, y'all are asking questions. We also have the virtual world, and their questions should appear on my left for those that are watching their computers. Then we also have the spiritual participants that are always fun. So we invite everyone to participate. If you are watching virtually and you have a question, post your question and we will get to it. If we don't get to it during the Lyceum, we'll get to it afterwards. So this month, I'd like to focus on the beginning of spiritualism, at least modern spiritualism. So we're going to talk about an introduction to spiritualism. We're also going to talk about the Fox sisters, because they were a big part of the movement and the philosophy back in the beginning. But let's talk about the word spiritualism. I was watching Lyceum about a month or so ago, and someone asked the question, can you break down the word spiritualism and spiritualist? I thought that was a very good question. So if we just break it down, spiritualism, it's the ISM suffix, the ism, indicates what the word is about, a specific practice or philosophy. So spiritualism is a philosophy on spiritual, the same as spiritualist. It is someone who believes in whatever spiritual means. So that got me to thinking, if spiritualism is spirit communication, our religion is based on the belief that we can communicate with spirit. Why don't we call it spiritism? Or why don't we call ourselves spiritist? Anyone like to take a guess? Why do we not call it spiritist, since we're talking to spirit? Anyone want to guess? There are no wrong answers. About the same time as the Fox sisters, which we're going to talk about, there was a French educator by the name of Allan Kardec. And he developed and was talking about spiritism. So that reference was already being used, and those who study spiritism also believe in reincarnation. So as spiritualists, as in the organization, we don't teach reincarnation. So that was the difference in the two words. Why we don't call ourselves spiritist or study Spiritism. So I wanted just to throw that out. So why do we call it modern spiritualism? It seems like whatever we're doing is modern. Everything's modern. But we want to be able to separate modern spiritualism from something before that, which we call ancient spiritualism. Why? Why do you think we want to have that difference? Low participation. Low participation. Darlene, why do you think? I'm going to pick on you, Darlene.
There was changing in some of the belief system and clarity for it, and modern spiritualism, some of that as it evolved and it was accepted as a true religion was to protect needless.
Correct. And that's a great point that we'll get into in the future.
From now.
You see, you're a little ahead of me. Excellent. Yes, ma'am.
Some years to attach to this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so to go from ancient spiritualism to modern spiritualism, there has to be a date or an event in my mind. Something has to happen in order for there to be a difference between that and this. Because we can't just say spirit communication, because spirit communication's been happening for many years, thousands of years. Egyptians, Persians, Greeks, line was drawn, and we then determine or separate ancient spiritualism from modern spiritualism. So Hydesville, New York. Any of you been there? You think Cassadaga's small. Hydesville, New York is very remote, outside of Rochester, New York. It was a small farming community. If you Google Hydesville now, you don't get a lot of the township information from Hydesville. It likes to go over to the next town that has 14,000 people. Hydesville is really losing its place in history as a city if it wasn't for the Hydesville events from the 1848 and the Fox family. If it wasn't for that event and the building that's there, most likely Hydesville would have been forgotten. So Hydesville is a small farming community outside of Rochester. Okay, we're talking 1848. We have a lot of luxuries in 2020. A lot of luxuries, a lot of things to keep us occupied. 1848, not a whole lot going on. Not a whole lot going on. So you really got into the community. You relied on what was going on with your neighbors. You were farmers. You had stuff to do. When night came, you went to bed. Sun comes up, get up, you do it again. So the Fox family had moved from Rochester to Hydesville for farming. We had John the father, Margarita the mother, and they had 7 children. Now, by the time they had moved to Hydesville, only the 2 youngest daughters were still with the family. The oldest 5, the very oldest daughter passed away in infancy, but the other 4 had already moved on with their lives, married with families. So we had John and Margaret Fox with Catherine and Margarita. Margarita was about 15 at the time, and Catherine was about 12 at the time. So they had moved to Hydesville in December. Great time to move to New York in the dead of winter. They had moved there to build a new home, to start a new life. But very strange. Once they had moved in, the spirit activity started almost immediately. Now, I pulled this from, I might have to take this home. Pulled this off the wall. This is the original Fox cottage. Hydesville, New York. This is the original cottage. Lou, you've never seen that before, have you? Original cottage, Hydesville, New York. Not very big. Not very big. So luckily only 4 of the family members were there at the time. The upstairs, instead of an attic, there was a living space. So they had downstairs and the upstairs. Most likely the rooms that they were living in were upstairs. But as soon as they moved in, they started having strange phenomenon. They had the wrappings. Can you imagine going to bed night after night and just hearing the wrappings? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, it dawned on them 3 months later to start talking to them. But a lot of families prior to that were just driven away because they were scared. It had the reputation of being called the spook house. Don't want to move there. That's the spook house. Strange things happen in that house. Prior to the Fox family moving there, it was the Bell family. They had been there for about 3 years before that. So the wrappings just continued night after night until the evening of March 31st. Yes, John?
I always wondered how spirits make something move, make noise.
Excellent question. I would say take a lot of energy, a lot of residual energy. The spirit has energy, it's built up.
But they're in 2 different worlds.
Mm-hmm.
So how can one world play in another world? It's impossible.
So the question was, I'm not sure if anyone could hear it on the virtual side. How can spirit manifest movement? How can spirit manifest sound? Correct, John?
Yeah.
Okay.
They gotta move something to make noise, like a hammer or a piece of wood or something. How could they do that?
I don't think he was, the spirit at that time was moving anything to make the noise. I believe they just had the ability to make that rapping sound. Same as a manifestation if a spirit was to show up and start talking to you. You've had sounds at your house, I'm sure.
No.
Your wife's a medium. I'm sure there's got to be
Well,
spirit.
She heard the mind.
How it actually works, I can't tell you. I just know that it is a lot of energy that would take place in order for the sounds to be made, or as we've seen, furniture being moved, objects being moved. They talked about the feeling of someone touching them. Louis, you want to talk? Or
Yeah, I could say something.
go ahead.
A lot of the movement, the changes the spirit actually does, is actually has a connection to do with psychometry. The energy of the object, the energy of the room. Should I come up?
Right here, right this way.
It's your mic right here.
As it actually comes into psychometry, because the energy of the room, because if the peddler was actually killed in that home and buried in the basement, the energy of the event, the energy of what was going on at that time of his passing, was actually compelled within the room, within the space. So the energy was already there.
Right.
That's why some houses in Cassadaga have a lot of spiritual activity, some don't. Because there's been a lot of work done in those homes, a lot of spiritual connection to spirit, which actually raises the vibration, which allows it to attract spirit.
So I would call that a lot of residual energy. And you gave away the ending to the story. You killed the suspense. So, a lot of activity going on in the house, and March 31st, 1848, about 4 months after they had moved into the house, it seemed to get louder, where it was actually touching them, and they were becoming a little more frightened. So, I probably would have moved out, since I wasn't a spiritualist. Probably wasn't a spiritualist back then. Now it doesn't bother me. But back then it probably would have scared the bejeebers out of me. And I'd probably left. But they stayed. So that night, on March 31st, 1848, they did what we naturally do now. They decided to try and communicate with the spirit. At that time, they didn't know who it was or where they were buried, even though Pastor Gates gave it away. So they would ask, do as I do. Clap their hands. Rapping would come. The mother asked, how many children do I have? And it's 7 times. How old is each one? It would rap out their ages. So they knew there was some kind of intelligence there. Can you see me? Do as I do. It would rap and now of rappings. That's the only way they knew how to communicate at that time was through rappings. Okay, how am I going to get information out of rappings? Darlene.
The alphabet.
The alphabet. How many letters in the alphabet? A lot. So, they would go through the alphabet. A, no raps. B, no raps. C, okay. C. Next letter. Goodness gracious, I don't have time for that. I don't have, we got to figure out a different way to communicate than to sitting there spelling it all out. But that's the way they did it. So it spelled out to them. They got a lot of information. Is this a spirit? Rap twice for yes. They got the yes. Were you injured in this cottage? Yes. Is the person still alive who injured you? Yes. Will you tell us their name? No. But I'll give you their initials. So they gave the initials LB. And we know historically the Bell family had lived there before. So we naturally assume one of the Bells is a murderer. We didn't have NCI back then. So they continued to ask questions. Were you murdered in the house? Yes. Are you buried in the house? Yes, I'm buried in the cellar. So through this long process, they got a lot of information to go on. The next day, They did dig down into the cellar. They found, from what we're told, fragments of a skull and some hair. They did not find the skeleton. They did not find what they thought they were going to find. But next week I'll bring some pictures of what it looks like now. Where the house sits, down from it is a river, small creek, that overflows part of the year. So when they were digging in the cellar, it's probably during the year, the water levels were high and they couldn't dig because of the water. So we found out that the peddler, that it was a peddler. His name was Charles Rosna, R-O-S-N-A. He was a peddler. He would go door to door selling his goods. And that someone with the initials LB murdered him, stole his goods, stole his money, and buried him in the cellar. So at that point, we have established definite spirit communication. The philosophy had started on spiritualism, the philosophical movement of being able to communicate with spirit. So that's why we use March 31st, 1848 as the beginning of modern spiritualism. So one thing the mother had asked the spirit, very smart lady if you think about it. If you're in a house and there's strange things going on, what do you want? You want to be able to prove it to other people. Because if not, then it's just you going around the neighborhood saying, hey, we spoke to spirit last night. And the people say, well, yeah, you live in the spook house. And that's, you're becoming kind of strange like the spook house is. But what was nice is they've communicated, they started building, I want to call it a rapport with the spirit of the murdered peddler. In that way, the mother had asked then, if we bring our friends and neighbors in, will you demonstrate the wrappings in front of them? And yes, Spirit wanted to be known. He wanted people to know, yes, this can take place, and hopefully maybe find my murderer. So the next day, people started arriving, asking questions of the spirit and getting answers. So they said at one time there were 200 people. Where's my picture? 200 people in and around this cottage waiting for their turn to get in and talk to spirit. 200 people waiting to go through the alphabet, A, B, C. And I laugh at myself because whenever we do spirit communication seances with the table tipping, people want to start going through the alphabet to get the answers. And my patients, I said, no, let's start off with yes, no questions, then build from there. Because if you go through the alphabet, it's going to be very tedious. So Hydesville made the papers. Again, proof that it actually did happen. It's no longer just a fictional story. It's an event that made the headlines. The excitement in reference to the mysterious knocking in a house at Hydesville in Wayne County still continues. And the revelations which makes daily are astonishing the multitude. A pamphlet has been published containing a great number of certificates from individuals residing in the neighborhood. Certificates, people attesting to, yes, this actually happened. I went there, I participated, I communicated. So they made the paper. Springfield Express of New York, the Green Bay Advocate, Jeffersonian Republic, Hydesville. So big time, big news. Spirit Rappings in Hydesville. The Hydesville Rappers. Sounds like a band, doesn't it? What was your question?
I was gonna say, during that time, wasn't it kind of like faux pas or like whatever to talk about spirit or whatever?
To talk about spirit, I'd say no, because
Like Salem witch, I don't know when all that stuff was and whatnot.
Salem witch was 1600s.
Okay, all right, so we're
So we're a couple hundred years past that. But in future teachings, you'll learn that they used to have spirit parties where they would come over and they would do table tipping and tea. It was a social event. So that's why I say no, because I don't believe it became faux pas until religion started getting involved some years later, which I will get into. Not today, in a future teaching. Yes, sir.
I thought spiritualism started in the Civil War.
Spiritualism saw a surge because of the Civil War and the amount of people who deceased. And people wanted to reconnect with their relatives. Whenever there's a war, a lot of people are passing away. You see spiritualism come back up to the forefront because people want to communicate.
Before the Civil War?
Hydesville was about 20 years before the Civil War. So it was laying the foundation, or the foundation for spiritualism. But remember, John, back at that time, it was still considered just a philosophical way of life. It didn't become a religion till probably 50 years later, which I'll get into.
How does it become a religion? Who says it's a religion?
I'll get into that next week. Are you coming back next week? That's the next step. Today was just building the foundation. Building foundation. Jamie, did you have a question or a comment?
We're gonna touch on it next week.
All right. Yes, sir.
Does the house still exist?
Excellent question. No. No. Okay. I don't know my year. The house was abandoned, but people watched over it. The National Spiritualist Association of Churches picked it up, moved it to Lilydale. 1915 it moved. Then it burned down 55. 40 years later, it burned down. Yes, sir.
What's in the original spot today?
Which location? Hydesville?
Yes.
What the NSAC has done is they built a mock house with plexiglass around it. And I'll bring pictures of that next week to show you. It's kind of a museum now. You know, self-guided museum. No one's there. You just go up and you can see. The cellar obviously is caved in, so the cellar's not there anymore. But the rocks and the outline of the house is still there. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
We often hear about the Fox sisters, but it sounds like what you said, the mother is really the one who started the communication, would you say?
I would say so, yes. And she doesn't get a lot of credit. The credit starts going to Maggie and Katie, the two youngest, which I'll get into next week. You coming next week?
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's interesting, they've opened the door for spirit communication. In the virtual world. No. If you do have questions, just post them and we'll get to them later. So that's laying the foundation. At this point, spiritualism is just a philosophy, philosophical movement. We all see philosophical movements even today. But what happened next, we shall have to come in next week to watch.
Who was the murderer?
Oh, it's never revealed who the murderer is. All we know is LB. I have not read who the actual murderer is. I would assume, and this is just me assuming, it was probably Mr. Bell. From what I've understood, Dino. The question was, did they actually know who killed? Which LB? So it was Mr. Bell? Mr. Bell. From what the stories tell us, is the Bell family was falling on to hard times. He rang the peddler's bell. Lewis, thank you. So, so supposedly the peddler had $500 on him. $500 in 1848 is a lot of money. He had all his goods. The day after the disappearance, it was told that the wife was very happy. She now had money. She had hired her, I don't want to say servant, her helper to come and help her out again because she had let her go. And all of a sudden they had money and material things overnight. So we're figuring that's what happened.
Dead guy in the cellar.
Dead guy in the cellar. You have to come back next week to hear how that plays out.
We'll show you the bone.
But at that point, they were, they were kind of, I hate to say, morbidly disappointed that they dug up the cellar and they didn't find anything. But history will prove that the peddler actually was buried in the cellar, because he does resurface some years later.
They didn't look in the right spot.
And they didn't look in the right spot. Timing's everything. Timing is everything. Do y'all have any more questions? We are going to end the Lyceum today. We're going to get ready for our service at 10:30. If you have any questions, feel free to come and see me, email me, put it online. We'll get your questions answered. Next week, we'll talk about what did the Fox sisters, the Fox family do once they made this communication with Spirit, and how their lives changed forever. Thank you.